you know, if you give too much of your ins, Andy, they'll lock you up. Well, I tried giving as much as I could. They didn't lock me up. They published it and paid me.
For thousands of years, humans have explored the social bonds between species and more specifically, the possibility of mutual communication with animals. Domestication indicates that advances have been made, but what if it went beyond that? What if when you spoke to Mittens, she responded right back to you in plain English? Or if you didn't have to ask Buster who was a good boy because he's already told you? There is a good chance you've already pondered the answers to these questions and wondered when technology will finally allow for it. Technology doesn't seem to be advancing promisingly at the moment, especially based on recent headlines.
Female pedestrian was crossing the street when she was struck by that cruise vehicle.
Neuralink, in a blog post, says some of the threads from the device retracted from his brain in the weeks after the procedure.
Dodgy deepfakes created using readily available AI-powered tools have spread like wildfire across social media, sowing seeds of mistrust and blurring the lines between reality and often malicious fiction.
But I figured we could go back in time a little bit and talk about the history of human-animal communication. In the 60s, highly esteemed neuroscientist Dr. John Lilly was at the peak of his career. After graduating from Dartmouth and Caltech, teaching at Penn State, leading an NIH research lab as well as several of his own, he was well respected in the science community for his contributions on the human brain. But an interesting event made him want to study something a little bit different. One day in 1949, while at his Massachusetts residence, Dr. Lilly came across a whale that had unfortunately been beached. He was awestruck by how large not only the animal as a whole was, but how big its brain was and how intelligent it may potentially be. Now, it's no easy feat to study the brain of such large animals, especially outside of captivity, but Dr. Lilly had the next best candidate lined up for research: the dolphin. He and his wife Mary packed up their bags and chartered sailboats all throughout the Caribbean, learning and observing all there was to know about dolphins. Many people are familiar with the creature's intelligence, playful demeanor, and highly developed social skills. But despite the positive connotation that they often have, Dr. Lilly discovered that fishermen considered them pests because they're seen as competition as far as fishing goes. I'm sure the dolphins would have something similar to say about the fishermen. A year into the Lilly's travels, they stopped in Miami, Florida to check out some captive bottlenose dolphins at Marine Studios. Seeing them in this type of environment for the first time, Dr. Lilly claims that he was able to truly see their unique personalities and traits. With this new outlook on the species, he returned to the Caribbean where he would plant his feet on the picturesque beaches of St. Thomas in the U.S. Virgin Islands. It was here that he started his very own Dolphin House research lab. He quickly began the process of mapping the resident dolphins' brains with a probe, much like he'd done with other species in prior research. The problem with dolphins, however, was that he could not anesthetize them during brain mapping because, unlike humans and most other mammals, they must consciously breathe. As you can imagine, it wasn't uncommon that these procedures ended unfavorably with permanent damage or even death. But in 1957, one procedure led to the publication of international bestseller Man and Dolphin, in which Lilly details the dolphin verbally mimicking the laboratory staff as they spoke in a high, dolphin-like pitch. He further explained how the brain of the animal is 40% larger than that of a human and capable of complex cognition and emotion. Theorizing that marine animals were capable of telepathy, Dr. Lilly suggested that they could be taught English. Thereby, the species could take a hypothetical step up the evolutionary ladder and do things such as collaborate with marine biologists, act as eyes for the US military, and even vote. Ocean enthusiasts weren't the only ones impressed by Man and Dolphin. The interest of astronomers alike were piqued when they saw a parallel with extraterrestrials. This led to both NASA and the US Navy agreeing to fund Lilly's research throughout the 60s with the ultimate end goal of communicating with aliens. Meanwhile, somewhere on the beautiful island of St. Thomas lived a young woman named Margaret Howe. Since she was a child, Margaret absolutely loved the book called Miss Kelly by Elizabeth Holding. The story follows a cat with the hidden ability to communicate with humans, and this cat eventually uses her powers to bridge the communication gap between species and save her animal friends. Margaret became so interested in the subject that she needed to see it through. But unlike Miss Kelly, Margaret set her sights on marine life. The only problem was she didn't have the resources, training, or experience to do this type of research. That was until Christmas Day in 1963 when her brother-in-law told her about a dolphin research lab on the island that was unfortunately not open to the public. That would not stop 21-year-old Margaret from hopping in her car and driving to the eastern end of the island just a couple weeks later. Although she didn't have an exact location and only had her brother-in-law's word to count on, she eventually searched and spotted the hidden lab at the bottom of a very large hill. Approaching the lab, Margaret ran into Gregory Bateson, the director of Communication Research Institute in St. Thomas. After speaking with her only briefly, Bateson was so impressed by her confidence and curiosity that he invited her to study the dolphins and write her very own observations. Despite her lack of formal training, Margaret hit the dream jackpot and was granted free access to the facility. Margaret soon met with the resident dolphins, 2 adult females named Sissy and Pamela, and a younger 6-year-old male named Peter. Sissy was big and boisterous, Pamela shy, and Peter young and playful. Their previous claim to fame was starring on the TV show Flipper. John Lilly, traveling between labs frequently, was so impressed by Margaret's work ethic and passion for the subject that he hired her for 10 weeks as his assistant. She was thrilled. The opportunity was both unique and perfectly timed. Margaret quickly became like a mother to Peter, spending her days testing different techniques to teach him human sounds.
Hello? Hello? Clearly, Peter. What's wrong with the Come on.
She trained with him twice daily and loved the work so much that she disliked leaving in the evenings. In her notes, she described Peter as being a big brain left around to float all night and claims that not only did she miss him, but he missed her as well. Fearing that time apart could be detrimental to research, she was determined to fully immerse herself in the teaching process. She flooded the lab with 2 feet of water, creating a dolphinarium where she could stay with Peter around the clock. She moved in, spending 6 days a week in complete isolation with him, leaving only on the 7th day for his socialization sessions with the female dolphins. Living in a bathing suit and subsisting only on non-perishables, Margaret minimized her interactions with the outside world. On the rare occasion she tried to make phone calls, Peter would interrupt her by yelling in the background and making it difficult for her to hear. She would just give up and spend more time with Peter. Over time, he learned how to say ball and diamond and to differentiate between different objects, although when he tried to say Margaret's name, he really struggled with the M sound and often ended up blowing bubbles instead.
I spoke in single words usually and made inflection, something that he could follow. That they were very good at. The enunciation was not good. But if I said 1, 2, 3, I wouldn't get 1, 2, 3, but I would get
1, 2, 3.
While cute, Margaret was committed to teaching Peter the correct way to speak English, even painting her face so he could better mimic her mouth movements.
no question about it. He wanted to know, where is that noise coming from? What is that sound?
Fish in bucket.
However, her time with Peter also evolved into an awfully inappropriate relationship between woman and animal a la B-movie. As Peter matured, he of course became hormonal, and when the pair weren't actively training, he became interested in Margaret's anatomy. He began displaying physical behaviors towards her, such as focusing on the backs of her knees, ramming and biting her legs, all while whining, causing her significant confusion and distress. At first, she didn't know what to make of it, but after connecting the dots, she thought of a solution. Margaret tried herding him downstairs to interact with the older female dolphins, but this proved challenging. Eventually, she decided to take matters into her own hands, literally.
It was just easier to incorporate that and let it happen. It was very precious, it was very gentle. Peter was right there, he knew that I was right there. Again, it was sexual on his part, it was not sexual on mine. Sensuous, perhaps. It would just become part of what was going on, like an itch. Just get rid of that. We'll scratch it and we'll be done, move on. And that's really all it was. I was there to get to know Peter. That was part of Peter.
Margaret detailed these interactions in her diary, writing, quote, "I stand very still, legs slightly apart, and Peter slides his mouth gently over my shin. Peter is courting me. He has been most persistent and patient. Obviously a sexy business. The mood is very gentle, still, and hushed. All movements are slow." It seems to me that it made the bond closer, not because of the sexual activity, but because of the lack of having to keep breaking. End quote. Since living together 6 days a week, their bond grew undeniably stronger. Director and writer Christopher Riley later documented this experiment in the film called The Girl Who Talked to Dolphins. However, the story attracted controversy, especially after Hustler magazine published an article titled Interspecies Sex: Humans and Dolphins, which sensationalized the events in Margaret's opinion and made her uncomfortable. Despite this experiment raising the eyebrows of many for several different reasons, the project came to an abrupt end when funding was cut. Dr. Lilly had become engrossed in personal experimentation with LSD after trying it in a sensory deprivation tank that he invented. His new overwhelming interest in the subject quickly bled into his professional career, at one point even trying it on one of the female dolphins, a practice that Margaret heavily rejected for Peter. Later publications of his experiment suggest that the doctor was no longer as interested in the dolphins as he once was, and may not have even been in a stable frame of mind at all, considering his newfound usage of LSD. Thankfully, his work on the subject continued to inspire, leading to the creation of 2 science fiction thrillers called The Day of the Dolphin and Altered States, as well as a 90s action-adventure game called Echo the Dolphin. Disillusioned with Lilly's shifting focus, Margaret distanced herself after the contract ended, feeling like she was in no position to tell this esteemed doctor what he could and could not do. She would miss Peter dearly, but she was never blind to the fact that she couldn't work with him forever. Keeping a dolphin simply just isn't as cut and dry as keeping a pet. The dolphin house was no longer. Peter was transferred to a small lab in Miami, which was actually just a repurposed bank building. His new home lacked the space and sunlight he had become accustomed to in his young life, and unfortunately, just a few weeks after his arrival, Margaret received a heartbreaking call from Dr. Lilly. Peter had stopped breathing and sank to the bottom of his tank, which some, including the lab's vet, interpreted as suicide due to broken heart. While it remains debatable if dolphins have the understanding necessary to make such an intentional decision, Margaret believed that no matter the cause, Peter was better off free from the lab's depressing conditions. The story of Margaret and Peter has been retold time and time again in mainstream media, from Saturday Night Live.
And so it became part of our routine. You know, we would work a while, yank a while, work a while, yank a while, and then a tug or two, and then teach a dolphin to speak.
To Drunk History.
Margaret says, "I am going to teach you English." He's like, me.
Even to Rick and Morty.
Well, butterfly on a corn cob. I see that I've romanticized a wild animal, the same way Margaret Howe did when she jerked off that dolphin in the 1960s. Both she and I assaulted a captive creature, then expected it to be reciprocal.
Showing just how lasting the intrigue and controversy surrounding the research really was. Reactions were varying. Most laughed and thought it was a little bit weird, but many went as far as calling the relationship inappropriate and even cruel. It was described as an experience that blurred the lines between science, ethics, and emotion. Although it wouldn't be completely off base to assume that Margaret's passion for dolphins persisted, the relationship she built with Peter actually wasn't the only one forged during this time. Margaret ended up remaining in St. Thomas, eventually marrying the research photographer with whom she'd grown close as he documented she and Peter's relationship. The couple had 3 children and made the former dolphinarium in St. Thomas their long-term home. Many experts have questioned the methods and ethics that the Dolphin House used, stating that while science has proven dolphins to be intelligent animals capable of learning sign language, anything further just plainly lacks evidence. Margaret remained steadfast in her belief that she had shared a special and beneficial bond with the intelligent, complex creature known as Peter. In my personal opinion, as a die-hard animal lover, I have to agree with the experts when they say that this relationship was extremely weird. I understand loving your pets. I've had all different kinds of pets throughout my lifetime. Birds, snakes, turtles, frogs, ferrets, guinea pigs, cats, dogs, you name it. I've owned it. And I get developing emotional connections with them. They become like another member of your family, or in some cases, even like your child. But in all of my years of animal care, I cannot say even one single time has the thought of romance or anything even remotely similar ever come across my mind. And not to mention, like, that's literally a crime. Need I say more? Don't even get me started on the practices that are normalized in like agriculture and animal testing and so on and so forth. But of course, if there is money and or fame to be made, then humans make an exception. Anywho, I hope you enjoyed today's case. It was definitely a new one for me. Granted, I have seen people fall in love with inanimate objects on TV before.
He met Chase in a resale lot about 5 years ago.
Love you, baby. I'd say it was love at first sight.
So maybe marine life isn't too out there on the spectrum of oddities. I'd love to know your thoughts down below in the comments, and if you'd like to hear about the strange and disturbing depths of humanity, please consider hitting that subscribe button down below. I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to watch, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!